Hello, everyone! Today is the day that we've been waiting for. As of the timing of this recording, we are about 6 short hours away from the console release of My Hero Ultra Rumble on PlayStation, Xbox, and Switch, and PC users will be getting access to it about a day after that. Since we're all here waiting, I thought it would be helpful to put out a Day 1 tier list based on the official data from the beta test results and from my own impressions after playing about 60 hours of that beta. Now, this is just my opinion going into version 1.0 of the game, and it's possible that they've tweaked some numbers since the beta, but this will still be a good jumping off point for both new and veteran players. I'm actually going to be creating two tier lists for this video. One for how good I think the characters are at a high level, and a second tier list for how easy they are to learn to play if you're new to the game and you want to know how complex or how straightforward they might be. The first character that I want to talk about is Dabi, because he is at the top of both of my tier lists. Dabi is one of the strongest characters in the game currently, and he is incredibly straightforward to play and also very forgiving of mistakes. His kit makes him the best character for new players who want to learn the game. I don't want to call him a sniper necessarily, because his projectiles go from short to mid range and they don't require precise aiming, but he has all of the tools that a sniper could want. He can lay down traps around him and create choke points or prevent ambushes from behind him, and if that wasn't enough, his Flame Stomp is a great get off me tool, providing good damage and creating space to get away. When this ability is fully leveled up, it takes up a huge area, making it especially effective in the later stages of the match, once the safe area gets really small. Another perk that a lot of people don't know about Dabi's Flame Circle is that it blocks enemy projectiles, giving him a shield when it's active. All of these abilities synergize perfectly with his Fireball projectile, which tracks with enemies and chases them down, making Dabi a fantastic character even if you're normally someone with terrible aim like me. You don't even have to see your opponent to get value from this ability. One of my favorite ways to use this is in the later stages of the game, when there aren't many players left and a lot of people are hiding. You can throw out Dabi's Fireball and watch where it drifts to. Sometimes it'll track onto enemies and reveal them who are hiding in a bush, and you can flush them out and your team can run them down. All of these traits give Dabi a low barrier to entry while also giving him depth and nuance in the hands of skilled players. He's both easy to play, but not a noob trap. I will never get upset to have a Dabi as one of my teammates. The next character I want to talk about is Uravity, who had her role swapped from technical to speed since the beta, but her abilities still behave in the same way. I had a lot of fun zipping around with this character, and even though they nerfed her movement since the previous beta, she can still zip around quite fast. As it stands, Uravity is probably the second most mobile character in the game. Her tether, combined with her zero gravity trait, makes it very difficult to pin her down. Very often, she will be the lone survivor who is able to walk away from a team fight, and in the late game when the safe zone closes, we're going to see a lot of solo Uravities trying to win a 1 versus 3 matchup. Most of the time, this will not go her way, and so what's going to separate the good Uravities from the bad are the ones who learn how to use her excellent maneuverability to pick smart fights instead of simply running away and hiding until there are only two teams left. Now, fortunately for her, she can actually hold her own in a fight, especially when it's a chaotic brawl. That's where she excels. There aren't very many crowd control abilities in this game, but Uravity has one of them. Anyone who's ever played a MOBA knows how strong an ability to stun an opponent is and lock them down for a couple of seconds, and she can actually act while lifting her opponents up with the gravity trap. She can give them one or two punches with her tether projectile and then drop them on their heads, making her a terrific duelist, especially when she has the high ground over you. One final strength I want to mention is that her spin ability continues to hit opponents who are on the ground. Lots of other characters will knock their opponents out of range, or they might trigger them to blink and become invincible for a couple of frames, but Uravity's spin doesn't, so it makes it a great option for damage in the event that an enemy gets close, or if someone is crawling around on the ground and you're trying to finish them off. Uravity is a lot of fun to play, but I think they nerfed her a little bit too much since the last beta, and I ultimately placed her in A tier rather than S. A lot of the Uravity you see will probably just run away and hide, but the good ones will have potential to win even when they're outnumbered, and that's ultimately what this tier list is designed for. In terms of usability, I place her in a tier of needing some skill to play. She may be ridiculously mobile, but it will be hard for most players to use her effectively to actually be of some use to their team. A lot of them will learn how to survive to the very end, but they won't accomplish very much. The next hero I want to talk about is Froppy. So much of what I talked about with Uravity also applies to Froppy. She is the most mobile hero in the game, and she's got a similar tether ability allowing her to swing from buildings just like Spider-Man, and she can dash up the sides of walls. After playing a character like Froppy, it is physically painful to have to slowly climb up the walls the way most characters have to normally. And she can turn herself invisible, meaning that just like Uravity, you'll very often see Froppy as one of the final characters as the circle closes in, and often they'll be by themselves because their team died and they were forced to run away. So we've got excellent mobility, easy to get around, and get leveled up and survive into the late game, but Froppy can also dish out the damage. Whenever she catches an opponent by themselves scavenging for items, she can give them a quick tongue lashing, tether away, engage her invisibility, and then make another approach to rinse and repeat. She's not great at dealing with entire teams at once. The more enemies make it harder for her to run away, reset the engagement, and pick and choose the fights that she wants. But that said, depending on the terrain, it is possible to take on an entire team. I did manage to win one versus three as a Froppy in the Typhoon area, and I did it thanks to her insane mobility, being able to swing around with her tongue, run up the sides of buildings, and re-engage while invisible. It felt like being a vengeful ghost just haunting this team, and I was able to whittle their health down little by little. Once they were out of potions, I would take them out one by one. It was glorious, and it was only possible because of those strengths that I described. Being annoying, and taking strategic engagements, not charging in head first. You have to play smart with her. There is one other reason why I rate Froppy so highly, and it's because she has the best assist skill in the game. Lots of characters have the ability to pick up an ally who's been downed and carry them away to safety, but when Froppy uses her assist, they are immediately yanked out of harm's way and immediately brought back to their feet. I cannot understate just how powerful this ability is to instantly bring back a downed teammate, and all of those traits combined justify her position in the plus ultra tier when in the hands of a skilled player. Unfortunately, lots of Froppy players are just going to run around and hide and not know how to use her incredible support and assassination abilities, and they're going to teach themselves some bad habits, which is why I do not recommend her right away for the new players. The next hero that we're going to talk about is the mirror opposite of Froppy. Where Froppy excels at instantly raising her allies, Toga has the ability to instantly KO fallen enemies. Every character has the ability to finish off a downed opponent through a stylish animation, which will fully restore your shield gauge if you can complete it. The problem is that oftentimes the KO animation takes far too long to finish, and someone else is going to take advantage of your immobility and attack you. But Toga has the ability to instantly finish off a downed enemy. She doesn't get the benefit of topping off her shields if she does the quick execution, but she does fill up her transformation meter, and it can't be overstated just how important it is to reliably finish off someone quickly in the chaos of a team fight. The rest of her kit is also quite solid. Her knife projectile has a surprisingly long range. She's up there with Shoto and Bakugo as far as effective distance. Her flurry of slashes can be a little bit difficult to aim, but they do good damage, and they can be used for maneuverability. And her transform ability makes her the most versatile hero in the game, theoretically giving you the tools for whatever situation might arise, although this means you have to get familiar with playing every character in order to use this option well. It's hard to know exactly how strong the character you transform into is going to be, because you won't know their levels until you transform. So I usually like to keep the blood of supportive characters like Ida or Froppy, so that even if their skills aren't leveled up, I can still use their triangle ability to rescue a teammate. Overall, a well-played Toga can contribute a lot to a team fight due to her ability to quickly finish off downed opponents, and the rest of her kit is solid enough to put her in the A tier. As far as ease of use, I don't think her transform ability is going to fool people like the Team Fortress Spy, and her flurry of stabs can make her a bit difficult to control, but overall, she is straightforward enough to put her in the middle of the pack if new players want to pick her up. The final member of the Speedy Blue characters is Class Rep Ida. Ida is one of 3 new characters added since the beta, and he was an absolute terror in the beta. I initially had a hard time controlling him, but once I got the handle on his abilities, I was able to juggle opponents through the air like he was a fighting game character. It felt like he belonged in Marvel vs. Capcom with how easily he could launch enemies and combo them from one ability to the next in an aerial rave. My favorite thing to do as Ida was to pick fights with people as soon as the game started and everyone is only at half shields. I can't emphasize how strong he is in the early game. Ida can outduel anyone in the roster in a one-on-one fight, so anytime you see a character off on their own, you can quickly solo them before they're able to meet up with their team. He's also great in the mid to late game too. Even if he's outnumbered, he can charge into a fight, drop his abilities, and run away. Heal up if you need to, and then charge back in again. As long as he has the space to run, he is so hard to deal with. That said, depending on where the final circle closes, he can struggle. The sheer momentum from his abilities will sometimes carry him out into the danger field and drain his health. Some of his abilities also don't activate correctly inside buildings and can make him an easy target while he's spinning against a wall. But if he has room to run, he is one of a few characters in this game who can solo entire teams, justifying his position on the top of the tier list. But wait, there's more. Ida is incredibly self sufficient, allowing you to safely scout around the map for power ups and running back to your allies if they ever get into a fight. Once I got used to him, I would start spawning one zone away from my team so that I could effectively take all of the items there for myself and still be nearby to help if a teammate broke out. He is incredibly supportive. If someone should fall, he can quickly pick them up, whisk them to the top of a building, and then they can safely recover. He did not feel natural at first, and it took some learning before I was able to chain his abilities together, so I don't recommend learning him as your first character. But once you put in the time, Ida is a force of nature, an incredibly powerful character. The next character I want to talk about is the symbol of peace himself, All Might. All Might comes with many iconic and hard-hitting abilities, but overall he felt middling. His basic chain attack keeps him stationary for too long as he fires off all those punches, and the United States of Smash, while feeling incredibly satisfying when you land it, can be tricky to scoop up enemies the way you want to, and often misses. His tornado spin is fun and it protects him from projectiles, but when he hits an enemy, they're knocked far away, making it challenging to rack up several hits the way Gravity can with her spin. Even his escape jump isn't that great. It can be easy to follow his trajectory and chase him down before he can heal. He's certainly a powerhouse and he hits like a truck, as he should, but overall he ranks in the middle of the roster for both ease of use and overall strength. Deku is the next character we're going to go over, and usually the main characters tend to be middling in these games. They're the baseline that you can compare all other characters to. Deku is close to the middle, but if anything, he trends toward the upper tiers, just because of he's got a very solid kit to work with. For starters, his Black Whip ability gives him mobility similar to Froppy and Gravity, and it can also be used to drag enemies in closer to you. On top of that, he's got a solid projectile and a hard-hitting kick attack, all of the tools for a good jack of all trades. I didn't see a lot of him personally in the beta, but he seems to be a lot stronger than I can personally account for, too. I'm recording this after they have published the test results from the beta, and apparently Deku was the number one for most played and the number two for most wins, with a fairly respectable 27% of all games won. So he may be much stronger than even I'm rating him. He wasn't my personal cup of tea, so I don't have enough games personally invested to say for sure. What I can say is that he seems to be very solid and extremely versatile and easy to use for newer players. The only issue they're going to have is aiming that kick of his. Speaking of issues with landing their abilities, the next hero we're going to talk about is Kendo. Now, I had a lot of fun playing Kendo. She is actually one of the characters that I got most of the wins with when I played in the beta, but despite being a personal favorite, there's a consensus that she's one of the weaker characters, at least in her current state. She has some very strong aspects, but you need to be very conscious about her limitations in order to get any mileage out of her at all. For example, her projectile is atrociously bad at long range. It does not travel very far at all, but it acts like a shotgun at close range, and it often catches people off guard with how powerful it is. But you need to be careful with how you approach with her, because every other character is going to be able to outrange her and whittle down your health bar as you get close. She does have a shield ability, and it can be very handy for your allies to hide behind, but lots of characters have ways to bypass it. Shigaraki in particular can negate it completely, and he's just a hard counter to Kendo in general. And her final ability is a forward clap, which is ridiculously powerful. I think it actually does bonus damage onto shields, but its hitbox is notoriously unreliable. Despite the huge size of her hands, the attack does not land always, even when you think it should. With a little bit of tuning, however, I think Kendo can be a top tier threat in the late game when the circle closes and forces everyone into close quarters. Despite her flaws, Kendo can deal surprisingly good damage at close range, and she's great if she sticks by her teammates and supports her allies. And her kit is surprisingly easy for new players to learn intuitively, and that's why I think she's one of the best characters to pick up when you're just learning the game. The final member of the Yellow Assault class is Mount Lady, and I really went back and forth when deciding where to place her. Mount Lady's defining ability is her power to grow to a giant size and just completely body her opponents. Whenever she's in her giant form, she takes less damage, and her own abilities are enhanced, in addition to how fun it is to stomp around and play as Godzilla. The drawback with this ability is that you are visible from across the map, and characters like Bakugo are just going to light you up from long range. You find out quickly that her damage reduction doesn't really hold up when you're the size of a water tower and you have 8 people focusing their fire all onto you, which is why a lot of the good Mount Lady players don't even use her growth ability until the late game, and then in the late game, one stomp of hers can cover the entire safety circle. It feels really bad to play her this way, not being able to take advantage of her defining quirk until very late in the game. I basically treat it like a second plus ultra bar that you can activate in an emergency. Because she has to be more conservative in the early stages of the game, she needs to stick close to her team and fight smart. But if you can make it to the late game, she can be ridiculously powerful, stomping entire teams into dust. But if you get too big too early, you're going to attract more attention than you're ready for. I think Mount Lady is an A tier for her ability to help win team fights in the late game, and the numbers from the beta certainly bear that out. Mount Lady emerged as the strongest character in the beta with a staggering 27.8% of all wins, cementing her as the current number one hero. But despite those strengths, she requires good teamwork, and I don't recommend her for new players, as you'll often get yourselves into situations where everyone on the map is gunning for you. Now it's time to talk about the green support characters, starting with Mr. Compress. I expected that since he was considered a support, he wouldn't be able to deal high amounts of damage, but I was very wrong. His projectile can deal incredible damage when you level it all the way up, and because the projectile can bounce before dropping its damage, he's actually able to land some shots that the other mid to long range characters can't. He enjoys having the high ground, and he's comfortable fighting inside tunnels and buildings where there's less room to dodge his abilities. His other abilities are more supportive in nature. He's got a shield and an escape ability, which makes him an offensive, defensive, and supportive type character, all while allowing him to maneuver and reposition in team fights the way he needs to. He's an extremely solid character and a lot more fun than I expected him to be. He's both strong and easy for new players to learn the ropes with. The other support character from the beta is Cementos, and he is the polar opposite of Mr. Compress. Cementos doesn't hit very hard, and he's hard to use. An unskilled Cementos just tossing concrete everywhere is going to block his own team from getting kills even more than he's able to use his walls to shield the allies. It can be very frustrating to play as Cementos, and it feels sometimes like you're not contributing to the team. That said, a lot of people are placing Cementos at the bottom of their tier list, and I think as people practice their skills, he's got a lot of potential to rise, especially if they buff his damage numbers later. There are a lot of fun tricks that I've been able to do with Cementos, like block off the entrance to a building or the tunnel in the mountain zone so that enemies can't chase my team down and we all get the opportunity to heal behind a wall. He can also chuck his projectile straight down and create a tall platform under his feet, and he can just stand at the top of that pillar and chug a health potion where nobody can reach him. And just like Froppy, his assist ability can instantly bring a downed ally back to their feet, although this one isn't quite as easy as her version. For the time being, I think he's hard to use, and even if you do master him, his damage numbers are just so lackluster that it's not very rewarding. However, I do think there's going to be one or two Cementance mains out there that dedicate themselves to this character, and they are going to show everyone his true potential and just shock everyone, especially if he gets a good balance patch. Speaking of shocking people, let's begin the Red Striker class with Denki Kaminari, the third new character that was playable in the beta. Unfortunately, I found him challenging to use, and I thought he didn't have as good of damage output as some of the other red characters. The pointer shot can be really awkward to connect the charges and stun people to set up your teammates, and the stun charge is very easily interruptible, and whenever it's cancelled, it still goes on full cooldown, giving you no mobility options. His 1 million volt field requires him to remain stationary where anyone can easily hit him. I think it's possible that the developers tweak his playstyle and rework him a little, especially because everyone seems to agree that he has an interesting kit and the concept behind him sounds really good, but when you play him, everyone just decides that he's not for them. I won't say he's unplayable, but he and Kendo are both in a very rough spot and they both need a major overhaul. And unlike Kendo, his kit is a lot more complicated and not straightforward, and so I don't recommend him for new players to try out until they have more experience. That brings us to Shoto Todoroki, the character that I feel is solidly in the middle of the pack with no glaring strengths or weaknesses, just decent at everything and all around solid. I think his projectile was very long range. He's up there with both Toga and Bakugo for longest distance in the game, which certainly is points in his corner. His piercing ice wall does good damage, and it can be used as a shield or to trap an opponent in a corner. But his ice abilities in general felt lacking. In a lot of video games, the ice character is usually my favorite. They're known for their ability to freeze people in place, to be sort of a lockdown character with tons of slows and stuns and other crowd control, and Shoto just wasn't. Being frozen by Shoto is annoying, sure, but you're not stunned for so long that enemies can typically pile on you for loads of damage. More often than not, it just buys Shoto an extra second of time while he tries to run away and heal. That could change if they tweaked his numbers, but right now he feels solidly mid tier. He's very straightforward for new players to pick up, and I know he's a fan favorite. That brings us to Mr. King Murder Explosion himself, Bakugo. Bakugo is deadly at any range. He's got one of the longest range projectiles in the game with his AP shot, and his grenades are a terrific mid to close range option, having a very large area of effect and high damage. His dashing cartwheel spin attack can be a bit hard to aim properly, but it does good damage if you can land it. He's got pretty good mobility, although I would argue that his trait could use a third boost charge to help him get around, but he's in a pretty good spot. I think Bakugo and Shoto are probably the best examples of perfectly balanced that everyone else in the cast can judge themselves against. Overall, he's a very solid character with an above average damage output, nice to have on the team, but can't single handedly win quite as easily as some of the characters that are above him. Which brings us to our final character from the beta, Tomura Shigaraki. I'll start out with his weaknesses, which are glaring and important to keep in mind. All of his abilities travel across the ground, meaning that if an enemy is above you, Shigaraki is at a huge advantage. If it's not a structure that he can knock down, like the mountain zone or one of the taller buildings, then he needs to run for cover. And he's not good at running either. Shigaraki has some of the worst movement in the game, meaning that unless your team is coming to bail you out, then you're probably going to have to stand your ground and fight, since you won't be able to outrun your enemies. And that's it. That's Shigaraki's list of weaknesses. Aside from that, he is a powerhouse. He deals some of the highest damage in the game, and some of his abilities act like the death field, completely ignoring your shield and chipping away at your life bar directly. His abilities cover a huge area, and in the late game, they can cover the majority of the safe circle, leaving you with nowhere safe to stand. He is a menace, and I expect he always will be. The way his kit works is very difficult to balance, and depending on the damage numbers, he either has to be a top tier threat or just a nuisance that you barely notice. And right now, he's the top tier menace. I think he's incredibly strong, and since his abilities are all damage oriented and easy to use, he's very straightforward for new beginning players to play. Just keep in mind his range and mobility issues. Fortunately, this is a squad-based game, so if you stick with your team, you'll be turning your enemies to dust in no time. And that's the end of my tier list video. I hope it will be helpful for both new players and top heroes alike. If you think I got something wrong, let me know in the comments. And if you think my character breakdown was helpful to you in any way, then by all means, subscribe for more Ultra Rumble content. And I hope to see all of you in the game when it releases tomorrow. Ciao!